Hi everyone, I'm Jack the Rambling Raconteur, and I hope that you're doing well. I'd like to share a few thoughts on The Purple Violet of Oshaantu by Neshani Andreas. I really enjoyed this book. It is an incredibly realistic novel. It's a deep sense of authenticity. Andreas is giving us the sounds and smells, the tastes and textures of life in a rural village in Namibia. And she's doing it with a great deal of empathy because this is a book primarily about two women. We have Ali and Kana. Both are married. They're about the same age. They're practically neighbors in this village. And yet their lives are utterly different. The book is told through the eyes, the mind, the voice of Ali, who's somewhat happily married. She has children. She has a husband who seems to love her, Michael. We see her life and the way she's finding happiness in little moments, the way she shares this life with others. But right across the road, we see Kana's life through Ali's eyes, and we see just how different it is and frankly how terrifying it is. And so through that contrast, Andreas gives us this chance to really see their experiences and develop a real empathy, which I'll return to in a moment, because that empathy is critical for stepping back from the book and seeing it even from a deeper perspective. But within the plot of the book, there's a very quick opening in which we see that part of Ali's happiness, despite the gossip she has to deal with in the village and those little details, part of it is because she's happily married, whereas her neighbor Kana seems to be unhappily married. And very quickly, in the first 12 pages or so, I had been less than half an hour in my hut when I heard the screams. For a moment, I was confused, trying to figure out who was screaming and where the sound was coming from. "It is from Tate Shanja's homestead," my children shouted. I recognized my friend Kana's voice immediately. I ran to their homestead as fast as I could. I arrived to find everything upside down. The children were crying, and Kana was hysterical. She stood beside the fresh marks left by her husband's car. She was screaming and screaming, her arms flying everywhere about her. "He just came home. He just came home. Ask my children. Ask my children. Ask them. He just came home," she said over and over again. She pointed at the fresh tire treads. "See, he didn't sleep here last night. He just came home this morning. See the lines. He came a few minutes ago." Nothing made any sense to me. And she goes on and goes into the house and finds Shanj was sitting in a sitting position. His head had flopped forward like somebody who was sleeping in his chair. Kana almost tripped over his body as she hurried to show them his food. She ignored Shanj completely. She lifted the lid covering the food that was evidently the supper he had not eaten last night. "See, he did not touch any of the food I prepared for him," she said, holding the lid away with both her hands. "He did not eat my food. Ask my children," she kept repeating. The dazed look in her eyes seemed to indicate that she was a million kilometers away. It is as if she did not know or recognize me. She did not cry. There were no tears on her face, not one. And we find out very quickly why Kana is so concerned to tell everyone that Shanj did not eat her food, that he did not spend the night there, that he just died when he came home less than half an hour ago. Because this book works elliptically. Andreas gives us this very quick drop into the life and mind of Ali. We see some of the little struggles she's had, but then we see what's been going on in the village, and we realize that Kana is terrified because everyone knows what a disaster her marriage has been. We learn how violent, frankly, Shanj has been, as the way he's abused her, the cruelty he has inflicted, the emotional, verbal cruelty he's inflicted on her. And we see that everyone in this village could absolutely suspect that she had finally killed him, that she had poisoned him or something. And we find out as well that this is something that people in the village have suspected about others, that when men get sick, when something happens to a man, it's believed that his wife was the one who poisoned him, because they've seen the lives all these individuals lead. And so we see those lives as well through Ali's eyes. Now, the empathy is crucial because Ali seems to have the happiest life. She seems to have the husband who is kind to her and asks her questions. And so she's sort of lifted up as this individual who seems to be the happiest in the village. And yet, as a reader, as we see that despite that happiness, Ali's entire life is grouped into the same structures. It might be the happiest, prison in a sense of all the women in the book, but it's a prison nonetheless. The agency she's allowed, the choices and freedom she's allowed to have aren't necessarily even good enough. They're not necessarily something that should be desired and emulated. They're just better than what the other women are able to experience. And so that empathy that Ali has for Kana and that other characters sort of develop allows us as readers to also step back and see what Ali's life is like, and to reflect on that as well. And so it's a very thoughtful and provocative novel. It was quite controversial when it came out, because Andreas was regarded as sort of dragging the rural Namibian villages, through the mud in her depiction. And she said, I just want a realistic depiction of what's happening. It very much draws on all of these different ideas and these realities of that life. The book itself even has sort of dialogue and language periodically in Oshiwambo, an African language there, but also in Afrikaans, the language that had been developed in South Africa, near Namibia. And so to see those little aspects of life, how they'll speak to each other, but then when they sing, they'll sing in their language, or they'll be speaking and then suddenly they'll drop in some Oshiwambo, is very interesting. It fills the grainy details of the realism. It's not unlike what McCarthy does in his novels. But another book I was certainly reminded of was Sula by Toni Morrison, and the way that friendship among women is depicted, and the way that it can be very uplifting. It can be this sort of anchor in a storm, but it can also become incredibly toxic as we see the jealousy and the desperation to lives that some individuals have to lead. There is, however, an incredible passage where Kana has been sort of ill. Her husband has not come home at all to help with the farm on the homestead. He's off working at a mine where they can make money, but they won't have any food if the farm is not plowed and such. And so they go around and they have to go ask the different women in the village to ask if they'll come out for a day to help with the plowing, all of them. And that Kana will, provide food, sort of a meal for everyone, but they will come out, not unlike a barn raising. If we think of sort of archetypes from the US and then sort of the old US. And so the community comes together and they talk about how they cook and the different ways that Ali helps cook and Kana helps cook. And we have all these details. What are the ingredients? How long does it take them? It's filled with all of those types of details, except it's from a very different perspective from what we find in those 19th century realistic writers, because there's so much emotion, there's so much real lived pathos going on. And so the women start to sing. We sang all kinds of songs. We sang songs of our ancestors, frightening songs. And as they're looking at each other, Ali says, "Oh," widening my eyes, acting shocked. She laughed. I had never seen Kana in such a relaxed and happy mood. I stood still to embrace this rare mood. I always thought she had an innocent beauty. I must have been staring at her. What? What? Why are you looking at me like that? You are a beautiful woman. What? Forget it, I said, but you should have seen her face. We worked and worked. We worked with one spirit. We worked as if we competed for a prize. We sang in harmony. When we finished one song, the women would start another. When we did not sing, the Omatemos did. We let the music of the Omatemos take their course, loud and clear. We call on our ancestors, our great-grandmothers, one of the women called, and the rest of us confirmed. Wake up and look at us. Yes, wake up. Wake up and watch our bent backs. Yes, wake up. Wake up and look how hard we work. Yes, wake up. Wake up and join your granddaughters. Yes, wake up. Wake up and bless us. Yes, wake up. And they chant and sort of sing and cheer as they work together. The women understood Kana's situation. There was a wonderful spirit, a spirit of sisterhood. For once, all ill feeling and hate were forgotten. We were one again, sisters sharing a common cause. And we know that's true because through the elliptical stories, we've seen that some of these women have had affairs with each other's spouses. Some of these women have spread rumors or gossiped about each other. They've gossiped about Ali or about Kana, and yet they all come together here and share in this because they know what will happen to Kana if this land is not plowed. Not only will she and her family starve, but that she will immediately face violence from Shanj. The sun kept its promise and slowly lifted into the sky, gently stroking our naked shoulders with its beautiful yellow and orange colors. A new day. The birds were calling, screaming and shouting. It was not their usual soothing music. They sounded annoyed. It was as if we had trespassed on their territory. And so that is what this book is filled with. It is an incredibly beautiful book. It is an incredibly powerful book of friendship, like Sula from Toni Morrison. But it reveals friendship in all of its different sort of aspects and facets. And it really gives this realistic slice of life. Andreas sadly died fairly young, I believe in her 40s. And so this is sort of the book that she's remembered by, but it's a critical, I think, addition to sharing what happens globally. And it was written, I want to say in the 1990s, late 1980s or early 1990s. So it's not even a particularly old book, and yet it feels somewhat timeless in the way that it occurs. So certainly a key text I was reminded of was Maru by Bessie Head. This book is also set in the southern region of Africa and Botswana. And there we again see sort of a rural life. We see this tension that exists between rural and these developing urban areas. And from a perspective of just what agency do women have in these villages. A more acidic take certainly is The Sun Hath Looked Upon Me by Calixte Biala. This does take place in a more urban area and in Cameroon, and the language is very similar in terms of having this realistic, like, what does it sound like to stand, in front of one of these huts in Namibia or on the street in Cameroon. But the story ends up being very different. A key text in Africa in terms of regarding marriage and sort of how those perspectives are different, the gender roles that have been typified, would be the Song of Lawino by, and the responsive Song of Ocol by Okot from Uganda. And I think these types of texts, certainly Maru or Biala's work or Andreas's work, remind me of responses essentially to the type of book that was coming out in the 1950s or early 1960s, like People of the City by Cyprian de Quincy, where we see African writers asserting their own identity, their own culture, but often from a man's perspective. And this now provides a response to those ideas. The sort of incredibly harrowing nature that a marriage can take reminds me of Die My Love by Ariana Harwitz. And I had mentioned Morrison's Sula, but also I think Love, the way that the nonlinear nature of the storytelling, the way that sort of threads unravel and we see why the tensions that exist at the beginning are there, why the fears are there, and sort of how all of this transpired. It's very interesting. Certainly this type of book slots closely to the realism, both in the US, in France, in the UK, the deeply realistic books that were coming and stories that were coming out at the end of the 19th century, beginning of the 20th century. There's an aspect to the book that reminds me certainly of Their Eyes Are Watching God by Zora Neale Hurston. The language is not quite as poetic because it is so much more focused on the realism, but the emotion and the power there, I think, is very comparable. And then, as I had mentioned, Cormac McCarthy, the combination of small phrases and words dropped into the language from a different language, the sense of landscape, of place, of heat, of taste is, to me, something that's a hallmark of McCarthy. It's different from Andreas is a different writer. She's interested in different experiences and different lived experiences, but there's a real sense of landscape and of not just landscape grandeur, but emotional grandeur in her novels. So let me know if you've read her book, or if you've read any other works from Namibia, any recommendations that I should explore. So I hope everyone's doing well. Thank you.